The kids are sick again and need to stay home from school, but work is really busy and your boss has already chewed you out for not being a team player. Your bank account's almost overdrawn, but you still haven't paid the electric bill, and your elderly mom still needs you to cover her dental bills. Your adult brother is off on yet another one of his adventures, no doubt assuming he can call you whenever he needs something. Your house is a mess, your refrigerator's empty, and the dog just peed on the carpet again. Your spouse, well, that marriage ended several years ago, and now you're on your own. And well, there's that worrisome lump in your throat, your chronic fatigue, global warming, and of course the craziness of politics and government these days. Worry, worry, worry. Well, what is worry? It's a type of cognition and also a mental behavior. It's typically focused on some type of threat looming on the horizon. The intention is to help us to prepare and to maybe avoid the imagined catastrophe. But it can become unproductive and ruminative. There may be an issue with the content of the worry. Is it really a threat or a problem? But it can also be a problem with the magnitude of the worry, the classic problem of making mountains out of molehills. Either way, it's a waste of energy and it causes unnecessary distress. Wells defined worry as a chain of catastrophizing thoughts that are predominantly verbal. It consists of the contemplation of potentially dangerous situations and of personal coping strategies. It is intrusive and controllable, although it is often experienced as uncontrollable. Worrying is associated with a motivation to prevent or avoid potential danger. Worry itself may be viewed as a coping strategy, but can become the focus of concern. There are essentially two types of worry: worry about situations amenable to problem solving, and worry about situations not amenable to problem solving. For the former, we may need some training and step-by-step problem-solving techniques. For the latter, and this includes hypothetical problems that never happen, we'll need a different strategy like worry times or exposures. Let's turn now to a couple of contrasting examples of worries, and I'd like you to think about any similarities you might see to yourself or maybe with someone you love. The first clip takes us back to Amanda, our college grad living at home.
So let me ask a few questions about anxiety, and the first is about worry. So would you consider yourself a person that worries a lot?
Yeah, I think so. I do wonder, well, what is it going to be like if it's, 3 more months from now and I still haven't found a job? A year from now, what's going to happen to me? So, yeah, I do kind of, worry about that. I mean, it's not to the point of obsessing over it, but I do worry about it.
Okay. And it would be odd if you did not worry about it. Are there other things you worry about, or is that the main thing?
I mean, that, but I feel like there's probably other things too, but right now that's really the focus for me is just, finding a job. Maybe if I find a job that then I can find my way in life and find my path. But I feel like it kind of starts with that.
Sure. Have you ever had a panic attack or an anxiety attack?
I don't know. I mean, what does that feel like? I mean, it's hard for me to be able to say if I've...
Typically, if people have had a panic attack, they know.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's sort of out of the blue, super intense. When you're startled and it lasts for half a second, like times that by 100 and make it last 20 minutes. And that's sort of a panic attack. So it sounds like that's not a problem, not an issue.
Not yet.
Okay. Panic attacks, super common. About a quarter of the population have them at some point, but usually it's one and it's triggered to some event that happens. Okay. I'm wondering if there are other things that you're experiencing that you think it's important that we know about. Symptoms that have emerged, places your mind goes that feel a little too dark or scary sometimes, other symptoms that I haven't asked about.
What did we see? Well, she has a lot to worry about, but we're not really seeing a broader cognitive style or personality trait for her. Thus, the strategies we use might be a bit different. Is it rumination? Is it brooding? Let's compare this with a second example. We know that Miriam is a worrier, and she too has lots to worry about. Let's see how it comes up for her and think about what we might do.
Miriam, you mentioned that you are a worrywart. Can you say more about what you mean by that?
Worrywart, worrying about everything. I worry about my children. I worry about myself and my health. I worry about finances, about my job, if I will keep my job. I worry about my animals. I have 3 cats, and it's like having children. They're my children in my house now. And my grandson, I worry about his future. He's had some issues, but so I worry about him all the time, about his emotional well-being. Yeah. And it's just everything. And I worry about worrying too much, because worrying too much is really not good. So it wakes me up at night, and I start worrying about not sleeping, because you have to get up in the morning and you have things to do. So if you don't get enough sleep, you're kind of drained. So it's like a...
Sounds exhausting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is exhausting.
Yeah.
And so I end up, stressing more about everything.
Okay. So it sounds like a well-established habit or pattern of worrying in a lot of different domains of your life. So you worry about a lot of different things. It affects your sleep.
Right.
Do you ever worry so much that you notice that you get headaches or stomach aches or sort of other symptoms like that?
Yeah, I have an ulcer.
Okay.
And caused from, I think, worrying about everything, because when my husband passed away, then I was left with children and doing everything on my own. So it just turned into a bad health issue.
Yeah.
But constant worrying, waking up in the night thinking, how am I going to pay the mortgage, and how am I going to do things for my sons that, I didn't have the finances for anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it's a habit now.
Okay.
That
would you say you spend more than half your time worrying about things?
I would say yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And what happens when you tell yourself not to worry?
It doesn't work. You try, but then the next thing you know, it's back in your mind.
Right. So you have the best of intentions. You know it's not, after a certain point, it's not helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
Worrying is not accomplishing anything except to worry.
Right. Sort of spinning your wheels. And,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a life pattern I think I'm in now.
Right.
Miriam provides an important contrast to Amanda. She too has a lot to worry about, but for her, it's a more deeply entrenched cognitive style. She's a worrywart, to borrow her word. From a clinical standpoint, she meets criteria for generalized anxiety disorder, an anxiety disorder marked by chronic worry in multiple life domains. Someone with GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, typically spends more than 50% of their time worrying about something big or small. It's exhausting, but fortunately treatable with interventions like CBT. But let's first look at what we might do with a non-clinical level of worry. Think about our toolbox thus far. What can be done about it? Recall earlier when we were looking at automatic thoughts and deciding the best approach. We asked if the automatic thought was valid. In other words, did they represent a fair and balanced description of a situation that might need some practical attention? Remember, there's worry about 2 types of situations. If there's a real threat on the horizon, then we need our problem-solving and coping skills. Worries are just another form of cognition. They may be narrow or broad in scope, and by their very nature, they're often recurrent beyond the place of being useful. From a CBT perspective, then, the first questions to ask are, 1, is this a real and proportionally accurate worry? 2, will worrying about it help me address the problem? Is this productive worry? Initial steps often require resizing the worry and maybe taking some active steps at problem solving. However, talking down the size of the worry often doesn't solve the problem. Let's say you're worried about home security and you often feel anxious about a possible break-in. You look for evidence for and against, and you learn that your neighborhood is actually pretty safe. Instead of a 1 in 4 chance of being robbed, you now realize you have more of like a 1 in 10,000 chance of being robbed. Does that erase all of your worry? Not if you're a worrier, because the risk still isn't zero. Someone's still going to get robbed, right? This shows the limits of the purely cognitive approach to tackling appraisals about threat or danger. But what about some of the other underlying cognitions or habits of mind that might be driving this process? In addition to overestimating threat, these other types of cognition might include the underestimation of your ability to cope, an underestimation of the resources you have to help you face that threat, beliefs about the value of worry, an intolerance for things that are uncertain, having a negative problem orientation, or what we call the words of worry. And more on that in just a moment. For the underestimation of the ability to cope or of available resources to help, we can use our standard thought record and look for evidence for or against. Look for past examples of successful coping or resources that we've been able to tap into. Beliefs about the positive value of worry are different. Many worriers worry because they imagine it's useful for helping them to find a solution or to solve a problem. They believe that it's motivating, it helps them get things done. They believe that worry protects them from negative emotions, even though it's actually generating them. They believe that worry can prevent negative outcomes, and they believe that maybe it's even a positive personality trait. And what do we do with beliefs? Well, we test them out. A behavioral experiment might just do the trick. Worriers often have a very low tolerance for uncertainty based on their beliefs about what that uncertainty brings or what uncertainty may mean. Worriers engage in safety-seeking behaviors like reassurance seeking, double-checking, or excessive information seeking as a way to reduce uncertainty or to avoid it completely. They believe uncertainty is an undesirable state that should be minimized as much as possible. Let's return to Miriam to see if she fits the profile of people who worry, particularly her beliefs about uncertainty.
Yeah, because everything is unpredictable, and whether your job lasts for years or not, or your son's jobs last or they don't,
Yeah.
everything is dependent on something else.
Mm-hmm. And do you think uncertainty is almost always bad?
I think it's almost always bad.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And that's a common belief of people who have anxiety. And in reality, uncertainty means it's uncertain. It could be fantastic, right? You could win the lottery tomorrow. That's unlikely, but it's one of those uncertain things. It was uncertain that your son would go into recovery and stop drinking, but he did.
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
It's a lot of things that happen that are positive. We might not have predicted them. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we should look at as we're doing our cognitive exercises is your beliefs about uncertainty. And negative things absolutely happen. Sometimes we can control it, and a lot of times we can't. But positive things happen too. Right? None of us live our lives knowing what's coming next. Right? If you think back to high school or college or when you got married or before you had your first kid, that's all uncertain. Right?
Yeah.
And some pretty amazing things happened.
Mm-hmm. Right. So uncertainty isn't always bad.
Right.
But it just kind of seems it.
It seems that way. And I would say, and again, this is a theory we should test out, uncertainty seems like it's mostly bad because the things you remember, the things that your brain automatically pulls to mind, are the bad things.
Yes.
And that causes you to have the belief that uncertainty is
That's
bad.
okay.
So you're probably seeing our next homework exercise, right? Where we'll have uncertainty up at the top, and we'll have you create a list of all the positive things that happened that came out of an uncertain environment.
Okay. That sounds like a good exercise, I think.
Yeah. Well, we'll put up some guardrails, and I'll give you some more specific instructions. But I'll have you do that on your own, and we'll start to chip away at those negative beliefs you have about uncertainty. If you fear uncertainty less, we hope the ultimate outcome is that you'll worry less, because there's less to worry about.
Oh, that would be good.
Yeah.
Now, there were two other common types of cognitions and cognitive processes that come up with worry: a negative problem orientation and the words of worry. For negative problem orientation, problems are seen as a threat to well-being. People who worry doubt their problem-solving abilities, related to an underestimation of their ability to cope. They also tend to be pessimistic about possible outcomes. The words of worry bring us back to habits of mind and mostly to magnification and catastrophizing. You'll hear thoughts like, "It will be horrible," or "This will be a disaster." The downward arrow technique can help to clarify worries and put them in a form appropriate for a thought record. We can chip away at the worry, we can shrink down an appraisal of threat, we can be more accurate in estimating our ability to cope or our resources, and we can build a greater tolerance for uncertainty. But it's still not likely to be enough. So let's go back to the toolbox, and now let's think about behavior. I'd like to mention two distinct behavioral strategies. The first is distracting yourself from worry or obsessive thinking. You can do this by attending closely to sensory experiences in the moment. The second is problem solving, where you intentionally refocus on the task at hand. Now, with attention to sensory experience, these exercises shift attention to the outside instead of maintaining an automatic focus only on what's happening inside of your head. You notice the sights, the sounds, the smells, and any other sensations that are occurring right then in that moment. I tried this strategy with Miriam. Let's see what happened. You've come to the right place, and worry is a common problem that people will encounter. It's originally intended to help us to analyze a problem and think about solutions, but sometimes after we've been around that block a few times, it's not helpful anymore, and you just get sort of stuck in a pattern.
Right.
The thing about worry is, you've experienced this, it's not under our complete control. So if we tell ourselves not to worry, sometimes it just makes us worry more.
More about not worrying.
Right, and that's the way our brain works. So if I told you, don't think about a white elephant, you probably just thought about a white elephant, right? That's
right.
Just the way that it works. So one of the easiest strategies is to use, they call it attentional deployment, or we can just call it distraction. So your mind is occupied going down this well-worn pathway of worry, and we want to put you on a different track, thinking about something else, directing your mental energies towards something else. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, and depends on the strength of the worry, the kind of distractor that you need to use. The stronger the worry, the more absorbing, I guess, or engaging the distractor needs to be.
Okay.
A quick and easy one is attention to the present moment. And we could just do a little exercise right now. So if you were here worrying, or maybe you're sitting at home worrying, catch yourself worrying. That's sort of the first challenge. Once you catch yourself worrying, saying, okay, I'm going to focus on something else, and then just looking at the room around you and starting to name, like literally name objects, colors, textures. It focuses your attention away from the worry, maybe long enough to get you out of that track. So if you were to do that right now, just looking around the room, colors, textures, objects, what is it that you see?
Oh, colors, books, shelves, titles, plants.
Tell me all the colors that you see. Name the colors.
Green, maroon, blue, gold. Very different shades of green for the plants. So red on the books. So, and brown for the bookcases. So, and blue on your shirt. Very pretty.
Yeah. So it's amazing how much sensory information is around us all the time. A lot of times we don't pay attention to it, or we just sort of unconsciously put it on a back channel somewhere. If you move your attention to the present, to things that are in your immediate environment, it takes up enough bandwidth that it makes it harder to worry and to ruminate. So it's a quick and easy way. If you're driving and you're starting to worry, notice the things around you. If you're at home and you're starting to worry, or in the shower and starting to worry, there's always lots and lots of sensory information. So just deploying your attention, using that as a distractor, is one potential strategy.
That's a great idea.
So I'm going to ask you to try that out maybe a couple times in the next week, and let's see what happens. We'll also come up with a list of other distractors, and one of the most potent one is to pick up the phone and call a friend or have even a face-to-face social encounter. It takes all of our senses, takes our minds, and pulls us away from our worries oftentimes. But we'll create a full list, and you can pick from the list on your own.
Okay. Sounds
great.
good.
Great.
That's good. Very interesting idea. Great.
While this strategy might disrupt Miriam's ruminations in the moment, remember that she still has this deeply ingrained habit that's probably being driven by something. But what is that something? The psychologist Tom Borkovic believes that worry is a form of avoidance. By focusing your energy on the cognitive activity of worry, you get to avoid emotional processing. Worry is still unpleasant, but it may be seen as the lesser of two evils. And remember that Miriam is desperately trying to avoid thinking about the loss of her mother. Also remember that it's not just about avoidance, it's also beliefs about the value of worry and the danger of uncertainty. A behavioral activation therapist would work with Miriam to identify activities that would allow her to approach the emotional experience of sadness, including maybe looking at photographs of her mom, talking about what happened while her mom was dying, visiting other family members who knew her mom, and engaging in activities that she used to do with her mom. This would increase Miriam's sadness in the short term, but would ultimately help her in her grieving process. Of course, Miriam isn't just worrying about her mom. She has a more global pattern of worry. A common intervention that's also great for everyday worries is called scheduling worry time. I used this just last night as I was worried about something that I maybe left out of a lecture. There are a couple of variations, but one is to literally schedule 30 minutes a day to worry. You just let yourself go wild with worries, which satisfies all those ideas or those needs for the value of worry. If worries come up at other times, you just write them down. That leads us to the next variation, the one that I used, keeping a worry list. I keep a notepad next to my bed, so when I wake up worried about something, I can simply write it down and deal with it in the morning. That way, I don't have to rehearse the concern or the fear, or because I might forget it the next day. It's been captured, and it will be managed at a more appropriate time. Rumination is a specific subset of worry and is where people can also often get into trouble. The term rumination is a derivative of ruminat, Latin for chewed over, and is used to describe thinking that consists of reviewing something over and over and over again in one's mind. It is to focus repetitively on one's experience of depression or anxiety or whatever distress, including the causes and consequences of having those feelings. According to Susan Nolan Huxema, a leading rumination researcher, depressive rumination is typically focused on thinking about oneself and the condition in which one finds oneself, an ongoing perseveration on how badly one feels. It is to focus repetitively on one's negative internal emotional state without making plans, problem solving, or taking steps to make changes and relieve the distress. Essentially, a sort of wallowing or spinning your wheels. Later work identified two types of ruminative processes, reflection and brooding. Both involve turning inward, but reflection entails cognitive problem solving, whereas brooding entails passively rehashing the differences between how you feel now, bad, and comparing it to an idealized you or an idealized state. Only brooding is associated with feeling worse over time. Now, notice that worry was all about anxiety and the misperception of threat, plus the other cognitions and cognitive processes we talked about. You can ruminate about worries, but rumination is somewhat different. It has a similar obsessive quality to it, but it can include ruminating about your flaws, ruminating about regrets, ruminating about an injury maybe that you received from another person. It's not just garden variety worry. So what can we do then about rumination? Addis and Martel suggest the 2-minute rule. They give themselves a full 2 minutes to think about a problem. After 2 minutes, you would ask yourself if you've made progress towards solving that problem, or maybe understood something about the problem that you didn't know before. You might also ask yourself if you're feeling less critical or depressed after those 2 minutes. Unless you answered yes to one of these questions, the thinking is ruminating and you need to use a tool to stop it. Remember that with behavioral activation, you don't examine the validity of ruminative thoughts, so there's no thought records. Instead, you would look at the ABCs, the antecedents, behaviors, and the consequences, and make sure that you aren't in some way rewarding your ruminations. It's important to remember that if someone notes that behavioral activation isn't improving their mood, there's a good chance rumination is in the way. It might be short-circuiting enjoyment or preventing exposures from being effective. Either way, it has to be addressed and reduced. I'd like to end today by talking about regrets, those persistent, distressing thoughts that harass us about perceived mistakes, missed opportunities, or just more general disappointments. There's the common and deeply unfair hindsight bias, where we torture ourselves with the if only. But there are the bigger regrets too, the lost loves, the betrayals, the tragic decisions that maybe derailed our lives or hurt people we love. As with worry, we want to first think about whether or not there's a problem to be solved, or whether our sense of regret is helping us learn and grow stronger. If the answer is no, and it often is, then our regret is probably more about punishing ourselves and we need to let it go. But how can we do that? First, we need to recognize that it's human to linger. It's human to ask what if. Beating ourselves up for having regrets doesn't help. We look back because we want to learn. But once we've learned, regret just makes us anxious, depressed, or drives us to drown our sorrows in alcohol. Here are some suggested steps in coping with regret taken from Jennifer Tates at UCLA and published in the New York Times. Step 1. Evaluate how you cope with regret. Do you push feelings away or roll around in them? Are you analytical or do you get overwhelmed with emotions? Allow yourself to reflect on the experience and notice the pull. What does your instinct tell you to do? Step 2, interrupt your obsessing. Dr. Tates talks about something she calls regret spirals. This is really rumination where you just spin your wheels. Think about a time when you did this. Was there any benefit? Did it make you feel better? Consider giving yourself a time limit, then starting some behavioral interventions. Distraction is a common strategy, and I wanted to share one idea you might find a little jarring. The best way to jolt yourself out of a ruminative spiral is to dunk your face in a bowl of ice water. Seriously, it will snap you out in an instant. If that seems a little too extreme, then try popping an ice cube in your mouth. It will draw your attention away, and you can start focusing on these new sensations. Try it out. Test it out. You might just be surprised. Step 3, you want to revisit your regret, then repeat these phrases. Everything can be viewed from a different perspective. There is positive value in every experience. Repeat those as many times as necessary. And here we're sort of going for a silver lining effect. We can't change what happened, but we can still use it to learn and to grow. Step 4, treat yourself like your ideal mentor would. Researchers have found that self-compassion, not beating ourselves up, spurs positive adjustment in the face of regret. Imagine your mentor talking you down from a spell of regret. Would she focus on everything you did wrong, or would she encourage you not to be so mean to yourself, and rather try to find the tangible, practical lessons that you can learn from the experience? Step 5, clarify what matters most to you. When you feel profound regret, use the emotion as a springboard to examine what is truly important to you. Consider the values you most want to stand for and the values that are core to your identity. Step 6, take action. Are there things you can do to right the wrong? Can you reach out to the relationship to do some repair? If not, what steps can you take to use what you've learned and to move forward? How can this help you maybe with other relationships? The ultimate cure for anticipating regret isn't feeling lousy or overthinking. It's thoughtfully pursuing solutions and using the wisdom gained through self-reflection to act. So let's go back to our CBT toolbox and note that today's skills were both cognitive and behavioral. We use behavioral activation to help us understand the ABCs of worry and to employ strategies like distraction or worry time. We use cognitive strategies to help us more accurately estimate threat and to improve our ability to cope. We also used cognitive skills to assess and possibly change our beliefs about uncertainty, the power of worry, and the words of worry, those habits of mind that include things like catastrophizing. And lastly, we've thought about some strategies, cognitive and behavioral, to help us with rumination and regret. Please join us for our next lecture when we'll dig deeper into cognition and begin to address our core beliefs. Thank you.